Greetings everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's have a fruitful discussion on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's caste in India. So who is this Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? So he was a former Minister of Law and Justice of India, and he was identified as the main architect of the Constitution of India. So Bhima Rao Ramji Ambedkar was an Indian jurist, economist and social reformer. He fought economic and social discrimination against the untouchables in India's Hindu society. He later renounced Hinduism and inspired the Dalit Buddhist movement. He very passionately believed in individual freedom and criticized vehemently the caste oriented society. So, caste in India, their mechanism, genesis, and development was actually a paper presented by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar at an anthropology seminar at Columbia University on 9th May 1916. So, the text was first printed in Indian Antiquary. Caste as a human institution. So, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar takes up the initiative of unraveling the mysteries of caste. So, as he says, it is a complex subject and it is quite unexplained and ununderstood domain. So, according to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, caste is a hoary institution, and as he says, it seems to be a local problem, but that is quite capable of a wider mischief. So, what do you think about caste in India? So, here in India, according to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, Hindus hardly intermarry and they hardly have social intercourse with outsiders. According to him, Indian population is a mixture of Aryans, Dravidians, Mongolians, and Scythians centuries ago. So, people were in a tribal state with peaceful neighbors around. So they have evolved a common culture, superseding their distinct cultures. So caste was a homogeneous unit, says Ambedkar. So in Hindu society, according to him, is a federation of mutually exclusive units. So as he says, caste is a parceling of an already homogeneous unit. So as B.R. Ambedkar says, explanation of the genesis of caste is equal to an explanation of this process of parceling. So, as he begins with, in the first part of his speech, he gives a review of different definitions of caste given by different individuals. So, to begin with, he highlights the definition of Mr. Senat, as his definition on caste was a close organization, meaning the idea of pollution and exclusiveness. And then he highlights the definition of Mr. Nesfield and defines caste as a community that disowns any connection with any other class. And then he comes over to the definition given by Sir H. Risley, because H. Risley defines caste as a collection of families or groups of families bearing a common name that is usually connected with a particular occupation. And then he comes over to the definition of Dr. Kedkar. Kedkar defines caste as a social group with two characteristics. One is confirmed membership to all those who are born in their caste, and second characteristic is that these members are forbidden to marry outside the social group. So, what is or what was Ambedkar's view on these reviews? So, according to Dr. Ambedkar, these definitions were either too much or too little. According to him, none is complete or correct. So, as he says, these definitions missed the central point in the development and function of the caste system. So, now he begins explaining the custom of endogamy. So, it is an artificial chopping off of the population into fixed and definite units, or in other words, parceling of separate units. And they are actually prevented from fusing into other castes or the so-called other units. So what exactly is endogamy? So the practice of marrying one's own ethnic or religious or social group is what we call as endogamy. So now comes the question, is endogamy a key term in caste? Yeah, of course, it is. So according to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, endogamy is a key to the mystery of caste. And he proclaims that the very reason for the survival of caste system from the very primitive times till today with utmost vigor is made by this process called endogamy. So when it comes to endogamy, we have seen all the definitions. So what exactly is exogamy? So exogamy is the marriage between different tribes or a fusion between different tribes, right? So now we could see that Ambedkar highlights the superposition of endogamy over exogamy. So the superposition of endogamy over exogamy lays the very foundation of caste, says Ambedkar. So how does this so-called endogamy function? It preserves conjugal rights from within the group. So that's the main function of endogamy. And now arises a question. What if the members marry outside? Or what will happen if the members marry outside? Well, if the members marry outside, the so-called enclosed units called caste, they'll be driven out of their circle, isn't it? So here, the numerical equality. So what has to be done to maintain a proper endogamic process? So a proper maintenance of numerical equality between the marriageable units of the two sexes is a must. So to maintain the endogamy and to keep the group intact, this so-called numerical equality is a must. So what I think are the crises or the problems in maintaining this so-called endogamy, right? So first one is a surplus woman. And the second crisis is a surplus man. And both of them are actually this so-called surplus woman and surplus man are a threat or a menace to the caste group. So what do you think is this surplus woman concept? What is that? So when a husband dies, he dies leaving behind a surplus woman or an extra woman within the group. So somehow she has to be disposed of, just like you dispose of your use and throw cup or use and throw plate. Yeah. So she has to be disposed of. Why? Why has she to be disposed? Otherwise, she will marry outside the caste and will break endogamy. Got it? So that so-called enclosed unit will be violating the rules. So now comes the surplus man. Who is the so-called surplus man? When a wife dies, she leaves behind a surplus man within the group. So the same thing has to be done again. The surplus man has to be disposed of to prevent intermarriage. So or else he'll be marrying outside the group. Yeah. Or sometimes if he marries within the group, he'll be taking up the places of some potential bridegrooms. So somehow he has to be disposed of, right? So what are the threats that arise from a surplus man or woman or a surplus woman? So the threats are that they will transgress the boundary. What do you mean by the term transgress? Transgress is nothing but going beyond the limits, right? So they will transgress the boundary of the caste system. They will marry outside, or they will go to the extent of importing offsprings that is entirely alien or foreign to the caste. So now, let me come to a point. So what shall be done to prevent this? Quite easy. Dispose them off, right? So how will a surplus woman be disposed of, or how will a surplus man be disposed of? So coming to the surplus woman. So how to dispose a surplus woman? Burn the woman along with her deceased husband on the funeral pyre so that you can get rid of her. So this concept is called, as you all know, sati. So this practice is not quite practical. Sometimes it leads to problems. I'm talking about the ancient ages. So Ambedkar is referring to those ancient practices. So point number 2, what are the other ways of disposing a surplus woman other than sati? Enforced widowhood, or in other words, compulsory widowhood, right? So now, why do they assign these rules to a surplus woman? So they think that a widow is a threat to their community. They say that a widow is a double danger. Why? She may violate endogamy, or she may marry within and encroach or take the place of the reserved space of potential brides within the group. So, or in other words, she also remains the source of allurement leading to immoral conduct. So there are lots of problems that comes around from a widow. Well, so now how to dispose a surplus man, right? So before that, we have to see man as a maker of injunctions or various commands, a maker of commands. A man cannot be burnt along with his wife. So previously we saw that when a woman becomes a widow, she has to be disposed of through sati. The first solution was sati, isn't it? Though quite not practical, the tradition was carried out in the ancient days, isn't it? So when it comes to a surplus man, he cannot be burnt along with his wife. Why? It is hazardous since a man gains a dominant position with a greater prestige. Why? Just because he's a man, a superior quality, isn't it? So the same kind of treatment cannot be done to a surplus man as it is done to a surplus woman, says Ambedkar. So if done, what happens if a man is also forced to undergo sati? Yeah, they'll be losing a sturdy soul. Yes, if done, a sturdy soul is lost to the caste, or he is an asset to the group, isn't it? So he cannot be he cannot be allowed to die along with the funeral pyre of his wife. So there are only two solutions now available. What are those? The first one is imposing celibacy. What do you mean by the status of celibacy? It's a state of being unmarried. So on the surplus man, celibacy is imposed. But actually, this is also quite impractical. Why? This fails both theoretically and practically. So he can be provided with a wife only by, in the words of Ambedkar, only by recruiting a bride from the ranks of those not yet marriageable, so that he can be tied to his group, so that he wouldn't make an attempt of intermarriage, right? So what do you mean by this so-called not yet marriageable bride? So not yet marriageable bride in the sense that a woman who is not capable of getting wedded for, say, various reasons or certain reasons. So in doing this, the numerical equality is guarded. A woman or a bride who is not yet what do you say, capable of getting a good bridegroom will be waiting aside, isn't it? So quite unfit. So that kind of a woman will be tied up to this surplus man, so that he will be kept intact within his community, so-called closed community. Well, so endogamy. So certain facts about endogamy you could see here. Endogamy. Caste without endogamy is quite fake, says Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And he also states that endogamy is the only characteristic feature of a caste. Why? Okay, so the only strict caste. So the customs in all their strictness is observed only in one caste, says Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. What is that caste? The Brahmins, or the priestly caste. So every individual in a society is always a member of class. says Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So here he brings in a relation between class and caste. So a caste is an enclosed class, highlights Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So here you could find that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is connecting the relationship between class and caste. Well, so the growth and spread of caste all over India. So in bringing up these concepts, here Ambedkar, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar brings in the lawgiver of India, that is Manu. And he proclaims that Manu is quite audacious and tyrant, says Ambedkar. So he also brings in the point that caste existed long before Manu. So Manu here is identified as the upholder of caste, and he is termed to have been philosophizing about caste or preaching the caste dharma. So here Ambedkar brings in a scientific explanation of caste. So caste formation is based on occupation. Point number 2, survivals of tribal organizations. Point number 3, the rise of new belief. Point number 4, crossbreeding. And point number 5, migration. Well, so occupational group has turned up to occupational caste, and they are very consciously imposed. So here Dr. Ambedkar discusses in brief the system of caste. It comprises of the Brahmins, who belongs to the priestly class, and then comes the Kshatriyas, who belongs to the military class, and then comes the Vaishyas, who belong to the merchant class, and then comes the Shudras, who belong to the artisan and menial class. So now Dr. Ambedkar talks about the detachment of the priestly class. So here he says that the priestly Brahmin class or caste detaches itself from the rest of the community. So the other classes went separately into differentiation. And we could see that, as Dr. Ambedkar tells, a natural subdivision of society has taken place. So here, this so-called class system has lost the open door characteristic of the class system, and it becomes self-enclosed units called caste. So the so-called classes defines themselves as caste. So how have they done this? Just because the open door characteristics of the class system has been gone or it is lost, it becomes self-enclosed units. Well, so now here Dr. B.R. Ambedkar brings in sarcastically a question. So did they close the door because of compulsion? So he has brought in an idea that the Brahmins have closed their doors behind all other classes, isn't it? So here he gives in a definition or a statement. So some closed the door, others found it against them. According to B.R. Ambedkar, some closed the door, others found it closed against them. So you could find a meaning from the image given aside. Please look into that, you'll understand. So endogamy is nothing but a closed door system. So it actually originated from the Brahmin caste, and it was wholeheartedly imitated by all the non-Brahmin subdivisions or classes, says Dr. Ambedkar, and thereby they became endogamous castes. So just because of the infection of imitation, all the other subdivisions of caste segregated themselves in a closed system. So the status of a caste increased accordingly to the observance of the customs of sati, enforced widowhood, and girl marriage. So the more and more these trivial customs were practiced, the more and more increased the status of caste. Got it? So now Ambedkar comes up with his own findings. So as he tells, uh, amidst these divisions, there exists a deep cultural unity among all the Indians. So according to him, caste is a parceling into bits of a larger cultural unit. So he says that there was one caste to start with, that is the priestly Brahmin caste. And the other classes have become caste through imitation and excommunication. So these are the several developmental stages and even origin of the Indian caste system as proposed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And I have made it simplified as much as possible. You can also have a look into the text. So here the source is Caste in India, collected works of Baba Saheb Dr. Ambedkar. You can give a quick read to the text also so that it would be more and more meaningful. So thank you for watching, and those who haven't subscribed it, do subscribe.